Look, I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound really bad, but I need you to understand the whole picture before you judge me. I'm Cassidy. I'm 32, and I just destroyed my marriage by telling the truth. And honestly, I'm still not sure I'm the one who should be apologizing here. So, 4 years ago, my husband Reed and I had this conversation that basically ended everything. But let me back up because you need to understand what led to that moment. We'd been married for 14 years together since college, and I thought I was doing everything right. I was the perfect wife, at least on paper. I handled everything, and I mean everything: school forms, birthday parties, dentist appointments, grocery lists, meal planning, keeping track of what the kids needed for sports, making sure Reed's mom got called on her birthday. I was like the family's personal assistant. Except I didn't get paid and nobody seemed to notice how much work it actually was. Our kids, Emma and Tyler, were 12 and 7 when this all went down. And honestly, taking care of them was easier than dealing with Reed half the time. At least kids say thank you occasionally. Reed would come home from his job every day. And yeah, he worked hard. I'm not saying he didn't, but he'd walk through that door like his day was over while mine was still going full speed. Dinner needed to happen, homework needed supervision, lunches needed packing for the next day, and somehow all of that was just assumed to be my department. And the thing that really gets me. He never asked if I needed help. He'd see me running around like crazy and just plop down on the couch with his phone. If I asked him to do something specific, sure, he'd do it, but I had to ask. I had to manage him like he was another kid. Do you know how exhausting it is to have to request help for basic household stuff that affects him too? But here's where it gets complicated. And this is the part that's going to make me sound terrible. Over the years, our bedroom situation had become just another chore on my endless list. Not because I didn't love him, I did, or at least I thought I did, but because it felt like everything else in our marriage, something that happened on his timeline when he wanted it without much consideration for whether I was actually in the mood. Picture this. I'd spend the entire day dealing with Tyler's teacher calling about his behavior issues, Emma having a meltdown about some friend drama, the washing machine breaking, and 3 different loads of laundry that somehow multiplied when I wasn't looking. Then Reed would come home, eat the dinner I made, maybe ask how my day was, but not really listen to the answer. And later that night, he'd start getting frisky, like I hadn't just spent 12 straight hours being everyone's everything. And I never said no. God, that sounds so stupid now. But I never said no. I just go along with it because that's what I thought good wives did. I thought I was being loving and supportive and keeping our marriage strong. Meanwhile, I'm lying there thinking about the grocery list or wondering if I remember to sign Tyler's permission slip or mentally planning what I need to get done before the kids wake up. It wasn't always like that. In the beginning, obviously things were different, but somewhere along the way, probably around when Emma was born and definitely by the time Tyler came along, it became less about us connecting and more about me just checking another box. Keep husband happy? Check. Maintain marriage, check. Don't be one of those wives who lets herself go or stops trying, check, check, check. The really messed up part is that I convinced myself I was being noble about it. Like I was making this sacrifice for our family stability. I'd tell myself that this was just what marriage looked like after kids, that all my friends were probably doing the same thing. But Reed never seemed to notice that I wasn't really there during those moments. He never asked if I was enjoying myself or if there was something different I wanted or needed. It was like he assumed that because I wasn't complaining, everything was perfect. Looking back, I think I started building resentment about this way before I even realized it. Every time he'd initiate something and I wasn't feeling it, but went along anyway, it was like adding another tiny weight to this scale in my head. There were nights when I'd be lying there afterwards, staring at the ceiling, feeling so disconnected from my own life, like I was watching someone else live my marriage while I just performed the role of devoted wife. I started dreading those moments, honestly, not because I didn't love him, but because it felt so fake. Like we were both pretending something was happening that wasn't really happening. He was pretending I was engaged and I was pretending to be engaged. And meanwhile, we were just two people going through the motions in our own bed. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night in March. I remember it so clearly because Tyler had just lost another tooth and was being dramatic about the tooth fairy. And Emma was stressed about some project due the next day that she'd obviously known about for weeks, just a regular Tuesday in our house, which meant chaos that I was managing alone while Reed worked late. He came home around 8 after I'd already handled dinner, homework supervision, and the tooth fairy negotiation. I was folding laundry in our bedroom when he found me, looking tired, but also like he wanted to talk. He had been asking me lately if everything was okay between us, which honestly annoyed me because everything clearly wasn't okay, but I'd been saying it was fine because I didn't want to get into it. But that night, he sat down on the bed and said he could tell something was different with us, especially in our intimate moments. He said I seemed distant and he was worried he'd done something wrong. The way he said it, so genuinely concerned, made something snap inside me. Here he was finally noticing that I wasn't fully present, but only because it was affecting him. I tried to brush it off at first, that I was just tired from handling everything with the kids in the house, but he kept pressing, saying he felt like we weren't connecting the way we used to, and that's when I lost it. Not in a screaming way, but in a completely honest way that I immediately regretted. I told him that I hadn't actually wanted to be intimate with him in probably 3 years, maybe longer, that I'd been doing it because I thought it was my job as his wife, not because I actually desired him or enjoyed it. The words came out so matter-of-factly, like I was telling him we were out of milk or something. I explained that I'd been going through the motions to keep him happy and maintain our marriage, but that I hadn't felt genuinely connected to him during those moments in a really long time. The silence after I said that was probably the longest 30 seconds of my life. Reed just stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Then he asked if I was serious, and when I nodded, he got this look on his face like I'd physically hit him. He wanted to know how long I'd felt this way, and when I said years, he actually flinched. Instead of feeling relieved to finally be honest, I immediately went into defense mode. I started explaining why this was actually understandable given how our marriage had evolved. I told him about how I felt like his maid and personal assistant rather than his partner. Remember how he never seemed to notice when I was overwhelmed or struggling, how he assumed I was always available for intimacy, regardless of what kind of day I'd had, or whether he'd done anything to make me feel valued as a person rather than just a wife. I explained that I'd been trying to be a good wife by taking care of his needs even when I wasn't feeling it myself, that I thought I was being loving and self-sacrificing, putting his happiness and our marriage stability above my own I even said that maybe if he'd paid more attention to my emotional needs, I wouldn't have felt so disconnected from our physical relationship. Reed listened to all of this without saying much, which somehow made me more defensive. I kept talking, digging myself deeper, explaining all the ways our marriage had become unbalanced and how this bedroom situation was just a symptom of bigger problems. When I finally stopped talking, he asked if I'd ever actually enjoyed being with him, even in the beginning. And I had to think about that, which probably told him everything he needed to know. The conversation ended with him saying he needed time to think about everything I'd told him. He slept in the guest room that night, which honestly felt like he was punishing me for being honest. I laid in our bed alone, feeling frustrated that my attempt to finally communicate about our problems had backfired so completely. The weeks after that conversation were like living with a polite stranger who happened to share my house and kid. Reed didn't yell or scenes. Honestly, I almost wish he had, because at least that would have felt like he still cared enough to fight. Instead, he became this perfectly civil roommate who did his share of parenting and household tasks, but treated me like we were acquaintances. He stopped initiating any physical contact completely. Not just intimacy, but everything. No casual touches when passing in the kitchen, no quick kisses, goodbye, no hand-holding during movies. It was like he'd put up this invisible wall between us that I couldn't figure out how to cross. And the weird part is, at first I was relieved. Finally, I didn't have to perform or pretend or worry about disappointing him. But after a few weeks of this treatment, I started feeling rejected in a way I hadn't expected. I tested the waters once about 3 weeks after our conversation. The kids were at sleepovers and we had the house to ourselves, which used to be automatic couple time. I initiated contact for the first time in probably 2 years, thinking maybe we could start rebuilding our connection now that everything was out in the open. But Reed gently pushed me away and said he wasn't ready for that yet. That rejection hit me harder than I thought it would. Here, I'd been honest about my feelings, taken the brave step of communicating about our problems, and now he was punishing me by withholding affection. It felt hypocritical. All those years, he'd wanted me to be available whenever he was in the mood, but the moment I actually wanted to connect, suddenly he had boundaries about it. I started pointing out every little thing he did wrong, though I didn't realize I was doing it at the time. If he loaded the dishwasher differently than I would have, I'd rearrange it and make comments about doing things properly. If he helped Tyler with homework and they used a different method than I preferred, I'd correct it in front of both of them. When he'd try to talk to me about day-to-day stuff, I'd give him short answers and act like he was bothering me. I started suggesting couples therapy, but not in a let's work together way, more in a you clearly have issues to work through way. When Reed finally agreed to try counseling, I felt vindicated. See, I was right that there were problems that needed professional intervention. Our first session, I came prepared with a mental list of all the ways our marriage had become unbalanced. The therapist asked us each to explain why we were there. And I launched into this whole explanation about how we'd been struggling with connection issues and how I'd finally been honest about some problems in our relationship, but that Reed was having trouble processing my feedback constructively. I talked about feeling unappreciated and overwhelmed, about how the mental load of our family fell entirely on me. When it was Reed's turn, he said that he'd recently learned that his wife had been pretending to enjoy intimacy with him for years and that he was struggling with what that meant for their relationship. He said he felt like he didn't know what was real anymore and that he was afraid he'd been hurting me without knowing it. I immediately jumped in to correct him. I hadn't been pretending anything. I'd been fulfilling my commitments as his wife, even when it wasn't easy for me. There's a difference between pretending and making sacrifices for your marriage. I explained to the therapist that this was exactly the kind of dramatic overreaction I was dealing with. Session after session, I'd bring up specific examples of times I'd felt unsupported or unappreciated. I'd explain how those feelings had built up over time and affected other areas of our relationship. But instead of acknowledging his role in creating those problems, Reed kept coming back to this idea that our entire intimate relationship had been based on something false. After a few months of therapy sessions that felt like they were going nowhere, Reed said he wanted to take a break from our marriage to figure out what he actually wanted. I was shocked because I thought we were making progress by finally talking about our problems openly, but he said he couldn't continue in a relationship where he didn't know what was real and what was obligation. When Reed told me he wanted a separation, I honestly thought he was bluffing. I told him he was being ridiculous and throwing away 14 years of marriage because his feelings got hurt during one conversation. I pointed out that we had 2 kids who needed stability, a house, a whole life together. Was he really going to destroy our family because I'd been honest about some struggles in our relationship? But Reed wasn't backing down. He said he needed space to figure out if we could build something real together or if our entire relationship had been me just going through the motions. I got angry then because that was completely unfair. Everything I'd done for our family, for our marriage, had been genuine. Just because I hadn't been jumping for joy every time he wanted to be intimate didn't mean my entire commitment to our family was fake. When I realized he was serious about the separation, I started pointing out all the ways this would hurt our kids. I asked Reed if he really wanted to put them through a divorce because of his ego. He said this wasn't about his ego, it was about not being able to continue in a marriage that felt fundamentally dishonest to him. I started telling people in our life what was happening, but I framed it as Reed having some kind of midlife crisis. I told my sister that he was upset because I'd been honest about some issues in our marriage and that he was overreacting instead of working on solutions. With our mutual friends, I was careful to present myself as the reasonable one who wanted to work things out while Reed was being stubborn and dramatic. The divorce process was awful because Reed's lawyer made it sound like I'd been deceiving him for years, when really I'd been protecting our marriage and family by not complaining about every little thing that bothered me throughout the whole process. I kept thinking he'd realize what a mistake he was making, but he never did. 2.5 years after our divorce, I found out through Emma that Reed was engaged. She showed me the ring like it was the most exciting thing that had ever happened, talking about how beautiful the proposal had been and how happy daddy and his girlfriend looked together. Had to excuse myself to the bathroom to throw up. The woman he was marrying, her name was Sarah, and I'd spent countless hours stalking her social media by this point, was everything I wasn't. She had this career she was passionate about, this wide circle of friends who genuinely seemed to adore her, and this easy confidence that came through in every photo. She was the kind of person who looked like she'd never had to fake enthusiasm for anything in her life. The worst part was seeing how the kids reacted to the engagement news. They were genuinely excited about the wedding, talking about what they'd wear and how fun it would be to have Sarah officially be part of our family. When Emma asked if I was happy for daddy, I had to lie and say, of course I was, while inside I was screaming. My attempts at dating had been disastrous, and I'd basically given up on finding someone who could understand and appreciate what I had to offer. The financial stress was constant. I had had to downsize to a smaller apartment, and even that was stretching my budget to its limits. My relationship with the kids was getting strained too. They clearly preferred spending time at Reed's house where there was less stress and more fun activities. The wedding happened on a Saturday when the kids were supposed to be with me, but they asked if they could attend, and I couldn't say no without looking like a monster. When the kids came back Sunday night, they couldn't stop talking about how beautiful everything had been, how happy everyone looked. Emma showed me pictures on her phone, and I had to pretend to smile while looking at images of my ex-husband looking more genuinely happy than I'd ever seen him. In one photo, Reed and Sarah were dancing, and the way he was holding her, the way he was looking at her made it crystal clear that this was what real love looked like. This was what I'd never been able to give him and what he'd never been able to give me. But instead of making me happy that he'd found what he was looking for, it made me furious. Why hadn't he been able to look at me that way? The final blow came when Tyler, who is now 11, asked if he could live with Daddy and Sarah full time because their house was more peaceful and he liked not having to worry about money all the time. Emma, now 16, had already been spending most of her time there anyway, coming to my place mostly out of obligation, sitting in my small apartment alone, watching my children choose their father's new life over the one I tried to build for them. I realized that my honesty that night 4 years ago hadn't just cost me my marriage. It had cost me everything I thought I was working to protect. But even now, even after losing everything, I can't bring myself to regret telling Reed the truth. The fact that he was able to find real love with someone else just proves that what we had wasn't working for either of us. I may have been the one brave enough to say it out loud, but we were both living a lie in different ways. The only difference is that he got to start over while I'm still dealing with the consequences of being honest. Sarah gets the benefit of the improved version of Reed, the one who learned how to be a better partner through his mistakes with me. She gets everything I tried to teach him to be, everything I begged him to become during those years when I was slowly drowning in resentment and loneliness. But here's what really gets me. Everyone acts like their relationship is so authentic and beautiful. But what happens when the honeymoon phase ends? I watch my kids choose his house over time. Choose Sarah's calm energy over my stressed out single mother routine. And I want to scream that I'm the one who raised them. I'm the one who was up all night when they were sick, who handled every scraped knee and broken heart and friendship drama. But now they get to live in this perfect little setup where daddy and his new wife are like best friends who happen to be married. So now I'm 35 and single and struggling financially while my ex-husband gets to ride off into the sunset with his perfect new wife who thinks he hung the moon. My kids barely tolerate spending time with me because I can't compete with the stability and happiness they have at daddy's house. And everyone in our old social circle thinks I'm the crazy ex-wife who destroyed a perfectly good family. But you know what? I'd rather be alone and honest than married and pretending. I'd rather struggle on my own than spend another decade going through the motions with someone who doesn't even notice when I'm not really there. Maybe I did him a favor by being honest enough to end something that wasn't working for either of us, even if I'm the only one who's paying the price for that honesty. I'm done apologizing for telling the truth. I'm done feeling guilty for not being able to fake enthusiasm for a relationship that had stopped working years before I admitted it. Is that we were both living a lie. We just didn't want to admit it. The only difference is that I was brave enough or stupid enough to say it out loud. And while that choice cost me everything I thought I wanted, at least I'm not still pretending to be someone I'm not just to keep everyone else comfortable.